So we have to debunk the incompetent viewpoint many people have regarding our president. What viewpoint am I referring to? The most common one we hear, that Trump is a fascist. The cognitive dissonance exhibited in this claim is truly incredible. Not only do people make this insane claim, many of them actually believe it. They truly believe Trump is a fascist. That in itself is particularly telling. It delineates a lack of basic understanding of history and political ideologies. Nowadays, just making an accusation is deemed as true and authentic, despite the accusation having no evidence whatsoever to support it. This is a very poor mentality to have, and exhibits a lack of maturity. It's childhood banter, synonymous with the adolescent behavior we see young children do. However, it's actually worse, since it is being conducted by adults, thus making the impact far more significant to the country as a whole. So we are going to debunk that claim in this video. Comments like these do nothing but increase the distrust between those with different ideologies. What's worse is that half of the people that make the Trump is a fascist claim don't even know what fascism is. They don't know what a fascist government looks like. They hear something about someone they don't like, and since it reinforces their opinion of that person, they automatically believe it to be true, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. This is called belief perseverance, and it is a psychological principle that has been studied since the 1950s. Belief perseverance is where a person has such strong beliefs that they refuse to change their beliefs even when overwhelming evidence contradicts it. It is a common psychological trait in many people, and it is largely responsible for the claims that Trump is a fascist. In essence, people hate Trump so much that they will automatically see and think the worst of him, even when confronted with contradictory evidence. The sad thing about this belief is that when you look for the bad in someone expecting to find it, you always will. True maturity is when you accept the fact that you could be wrong about something or someone, and you are able to change your belief based on new evidence. But I digress. Many of these people exhibit, as I call it, one of the triple B syndromes: brain dead, brainless, or brainwashed. Many of these people are brainwashed, and by being brainwashed and spewing their false rhetoric, they are in turn brainwashing others. We see this with the mainstream media as well. They actually do this for a living. They try to control a narrative by covering certain topics and controlling who gets to come on their show. A good example of this is the whole border issue happening right now. The media is going crazy over this child detention thing. Yet, in 2014, when this exact same thing happened under Obama, the media refused to report on it. But now that Trump is in office, now it is all of a sudden newsworthy. There are actually many people who don't even know about children being detained during the Obama administration. On the contrary, they actually believe this is a new phenomenon, completely created and orchestrated by Trump. This is a great example of belief perseverance and people being brainwashed by the media. But let's get back to the topic at hand. So, I never really have Twitter debates. Normally because my opponent usually has one of the three B syndromes. But I did have a small debate with a couple people the other day regarding Trump and fascism. It all started with this tweet by a user named Lori.
That's what a fascist regime does. They make themselves above the law and richer while others are persecuted by them, killed, locked in dog cages and banned. This is really happening right in front of us, daily.
To which I replied, "Oh, come on, Lori. If you truly believe we are on the road to fascism, then you truly don't understand what fascism is. If Trump was truly a fascist, you would not be able to write what you just wrote. The mainstream media wouldn't exist, the 10th Amendment would be in jeopardy, etc., etc." And I followed it up with, "It's okay to criticize Trump, but saying he has a fascist regime is just so nonsensical it hurts my eyes. I would love to hear your definition of what fascism is. Feel free to DM me with it because I really want to know. Half the people that cry fascism don't even understand it." This caused another Twitter user to reply to my comment.
Fascism is a form of radical authoritarian nationalism characterized by dictatorial power, forcible suppression of opposition, and control of industry and commerce, which came to prominence in early 20th century Europe. Laurie's concerns are legitimate.
Well, I found this comment very interesting, since it is rather accurate in its definition, until I read the last sentence in his tweet, which caused me to literally laugh out loud. And so I went on a little rant. How so? Who has he suppressed? What dictatorial power has he implemented that isn't in the Constitution? What industry and commerce is he controlling? What constitutional safeguards has he bypassed as president? By your standards, FDR is also a fascist, since he was an ultranationalist and did things unprecedented at the time, using his executive authority in ways unaccustomed to the norm. We can also talk about Teddy Roosevelt using his executive authority to dissolve monopolies. He must be a fascist too, right? This is where the Trump is a fascist argument falters. There have been countless presidents more dictatorial and bellicose than Trump, and yet many of them are praised as great leaders. But with Trump, it's because he's a fascist. Remember FDR putting Japanese Americans in camps? FDR literally kidnapped American citizens and put them in internment camps. Woodrow Wilson violated the 1895 Supreme Court decision of declaring the income tax unconstitutional. Andrew Jackson refused to obey Supreme Court John Marshall's ruling. The list goes on and on and on and on. And he finally replied with,
Cittadini doesn't want the checks and balances from legislative and judiciary that can impede his agenda. He's a tyrant and wannabe dictator.
It was this comment that really gave me a chuckle. Apparently, wanting to be something makes you that person. First off, I'm not necessarily sure I believe that comment, but for the sake of argument, let's say he is correct. Does that mean that I am a rich, plutocratic corporatist? I mean, I like to be rich, and I like to start a business that turns into a large company, aka a corporation. Since I want that, does that mean that's what I am? I also want to be a professional poker player. I guess since I want to be a professional poker player, that I am a professional poker player. There are thousands of examples I could use to display the idiocy in that tweet. I didn't respond back to him after that. You can only go so far before a person's belief perseverance becomes too intense to deal with. But let's go over some of Trump's actions. Under a fascist regime, there wouldn't be freedom of the press. Yet, not only is the press allowed to discuss the news, they are allowed to spin the news any way they want. They are allowed to criticize Trump almost 24/7, and Trump has done nothing to impede that. Sure, he criticized the press, but there is a very, very thick line between criticism and suppression. Under a fascist regime, the branches of government wouldn't matter. They wouldn't exist. Trump would completely ignore the congressional and judicial branches. Yet, when his travel ban was blocked by a federal court, Trump followed the law and actually used the law to get it overturned at the Supreme Court. Compare that with Andrew Jackson, who is my favorite president, by the way. Supreme Court Justice John Marshall ruled against Andrew Jackson in Worcester versus Georgia, and Andrew Jackson responded with, he made his ruling, now let him enforce it. Andrew Jackson completely ignored the Supreme Court's decision. FDR, as mentioned in my tweets, literally kidnapped American citizens, and without due process, he put them in concentration camps. Woodrow Wilson wanted to completely repeal and amend the Constitution, and he claimed the founding fathers were wrong. He signed the income tax into law, even though the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional in 1895. And yet, FDR and Wilson are both praised as great presidents. Moreover, people claim that since Trump is a nationalist, he must be a fascist, because only fascists are nationalists. Well, FDR was an ultra-nationalist, and yet nobody calls him a fascist. Gandhi was a nationalist, and he was a socialist. Teddy Roosevelt injected himself into the U.S. economy and used his executive authority to dissolve monopolies, an act unprecedented at the time. Abraham Lincoln was a tyrant during the Civil War. He suspended habeas corpus, which allowed him to arrest citizens and charge them without due process. Then he ignored the decision of the Supreme Court that tried to reinstate habeas corpus. He arrested those who spoke out against the Civil War and imprisoned them without trial. The list goes on and on. And lastly, let's talk about Obama. You know, the same president who said he doesn't need Congress, he has a phone and a pen.
I'm going to be working with Congress where I can to accomplish this. But I'm also going to act on my own if Congress is deadlocked. I've got a pen to take executive actions where Congress won't, and I've got a telephone to rally folks around the country on this mission.
Obama abused his position in ways not seen since FDR. He violated the 1973 Wars Power Act. He created the Clean Power Plan, which usurped Congress by allowing the EPA to impose regulations. He had his IRS target a political group, which, ironically, is what the Nazis did when Hitler came into power. They targeted political groups that were against them. He created DACA, once more usurping Congress. He removed due process on college campuses, not to mention creating the bulk of Obamacare through executive orders. He created Operation Fast and Furious, which got a border agent named Brian Terry killed. He facilitated hatred against the police. And probably the most significant of all of his unconstitutional actions and dictatorial actions would be spying on the American people by using his NSA. And not only did he spy on the American people, he also persecuted journalists, especially James Rosen, who was a Fox News journalist. He tapped his phone. He tapped his mother's phone. He spied on James Rosen because James Rosen was asking him tough questions about his administration. So, where am I going with all this? Well, it's simple. There have been a lot more presidents that were more dictatorial and bellicose than Trump. In fact, when compared to Obama and others, Trump is relatively tame in comparison. Whether you find his Twitter feed distasteful, his policies and actions are in line with what the Constitution mandates. He has done nothing that would be considered radical or fascistic, especially when you compare him to other presidents. He has not oppressed any groups. He has abided by decisions given by the courts, and so on and so forth. So in conclusion, for all of those who think Trump is a fascist, I have to ask you, is Obama a fascist? Was FDR a fascist? Woodrow Wilson? Andrew Jackson? Teddy Roosevelt? Abe Lincoln? Thomas Jefferson? You can't have it both ways. You can't claim that Trump is a fascist, then say FDR was a great president, because FDR and others like him are far more dictatorial than Trump, and they are/were just as nationalistic as Trump, and many abuse their position as president. Trump is not a fascist. The Trump administration is not a fascist regime. The sole reason people are saying he is because they are either brainwashed by the media and their peers, or they are brainwashed by their own personal feelings regarding Trump. Hatred is a powerful factor in making people oblivious to the truth. If you like what you see here, please share the video and consider subscribing and being a patron. The Piper Report is an alternative news source that reports on news you won't hear from the corporate media, and a special thanks to my patrons. And I'm done.